Welcome everyone. Today we have our new episode and we will discuss on cognitive computing. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, and Mr. Marshall. Professor Rob, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Sure. A cognitive computer is an AI that addresses or approaches problems in an emulation of how a human might approach them. It's the cognitive nature, often using neural networks to recreate how a brain works. The training for a cognitive computer is fairly long. The capabilities right now are fairly limited, and the question for its existence remains somewhat unanswered. The reason is the way we approach a problem contains an awful lot of unintended bias, and of course the conclusion you reach then is that if you're introducing bias intentionally, which you have to do with a cognitive computer because it's the nature of how we think, that you can be corrupting the outcome. On the other hand, if you want to try to program a computer for empathy, for things you might want, say, in a computerized weapon system or a computerized policing system, it may be the only way to do it. It's an interesting field of study. The kinds of advances that we currently have in it as we approach concepts like the metaverse really flow through to what we're going to be trying to do with human digital twins, creating mirror images of people living or dead, and then going back and being able to question them as if they were alive. It's a concept that could allow generations of children to talk to their great ancestors. Or, for instance, here in the United States, we've got continuing issues with regard to determining how our Constitution was written and what was in the minds of the framers. And this could be a way to actually answer some of those questions definitively. What were in the minds of the framers when they came up with the idea, or going back in time, and for a judge to try to determine what was in the minds of those that framed a particular law or regulation. So it's got some interesting applications. The success I think we thought we were going to get with this technology, we thought was going to happen quite a bit sooner. And it's kind of dragged on. The emulation of the brain has just become problematic. The human brain is incredibly complex, and it has a lot of parts that we fundamentally don't understand. In fact, we've recently come to the conclusion that the brain itself isn't where the mind's located. The mind is located throughout the body. So our first approach at emulating the human mind was working off what may be, though it's not definitive, an incorrect analysis of that mind. So it's a fascinating area of study, applied particularly in areas where you want a human approach to decision making. But the approach, or at least the initial effort, was flawed by a misdefinition of what may be a misdefinition of what the mind is.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor David Smith.
I loved Rob making the point that our science understanding of the brain has changed about where our knowledge and our wisdom comes from, because for centuries and centuries it thought it was all in the brain, and we now understand it's a distributed function across the body using multiple parts of things, and that RNA and DNA and other things play as part of that distributed wisdom. And Rob's definition of cognitive computing was right on. And one of the first large scale examples we saw of cognitive computing was IBM's cognitive computer system Watson, and what it was trying to do and put in place. Let me jump just a little bit deeper in one of the areas that Rob touched upon. And as you look at it, we talked yesterday about intelligence applications. They're not cognitive computing, and they begin to go that way. But what makes cognitive computing is really interesting is all the underlying technologies it has to use to be successful. Rob mentioned neural networks, and very dense distributed neural networks are very important to it. Expert systems, machine learning, deep learning, multiple flavors of natural language processing, speech recognition, object recognition. We're seeing now that the amount of sensors from various types, from traditional sensors to Internet of Things sensors, all types are now becoming part of cognitive computing systems. And one of the more interesting applications of the underlying technologies that I've been seeing in cognitive computing is the increased use of robots as part of the cognitive computing environment. And what cognitive computing does with all those different elements is it uses self learning algorithms, data analysis, and pattern recognition to get the system to mimic what we do as humans, to get the system to begin to use things like sentiment analysis, risk assessment, face detection, all of those type of elements that we use daily without even thinking. Uh, in a computer system, you have to think about it to be able to use it, where we do that just in our subconsciousness. So as you look at cognitive computing, it's one where as Rob said, we thought we would be much further along than we are right now. But with some of the advances in biological computing and some of the other advances we see with beginning to use a hybrid computing environment, including elementary batch quantum and others, it's going to help us move further down that path faster, I believe. So, Sri, first comments.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
There you go. Okay. Thank you for that. I think Rob and David have touched upon this concept of cognitive computing.
While you're here,
with my background in
while you're here, out of the camera shot, let me show you a couple of things.
Oh,
Well,
Dave, you need to meet
Dave, we're hearing you. Yeah, I can hear you
Right.
that you're going to be out of the camera shot. Anyway, with my background in clinical psychology, this is the space where it's cutting edge, and as David pointed out and Rob pointed out, we're using applications to try to mimic human behavior and human decision-making processing. And I'm not sure we want to mimic human behavior totally, but certainly decision-making process is what I think cognitive computing brings to the table as its strength. One of the downsides of it is that the human brain, it doesn't function, and we still don't know totally how it functions, even from a neurological or a psychological point of view. And psychology cannot be taken out of the equation. So to give you an example, all the way from Freud up until modern psychology today, and there are different approaches to it of understanding the human mind and how it operates and its behaviors. One of the things that we know in clinical psychology is that there is a mapping that was done about, I think in 2017, there was a study done, I don't remember which one it was, in which they were mapping decision-making processes between in humans, not with computers, and they found that most people tend to do what we call linear processing. In other words, A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C, and that's logic. And many people get that. But we found that this study, I think it was done about a study of entrepreneurs and inventors, people who invent innovations, bring innovations of all kinds into the marketplace. And what they found is that when they map their brain pattern of how they think, it's not an A equals B equals C only. They do that, but they also do what's called lateral thinking. And lateral thinking connects Q, Z, X, and Y in some fashion. And it's still not totally understood. So until we totally understand that, I'm not sure that cognitive computing is going to be able to map exactly what a human does. But one of the reasons that humans are able to bring innovations in the marketplace is because of this form of what is known as lateral thinking. The other element of it, though, in a practical sense, it can be very beneficial. It could also be a threat to humankind, like anything else. I mean, mankind made the atom bomb, and atomic power is very helpful, but the atom bomb is very detrimental. So it's like anything else. And there's also a moral judgment and cast that comes over this conversation. when you're talking about cognitive computing, and if you want to mimic human behavior and human thinking, what component of the morality are you putting into it? And I think David and Rob kind of touched upon that in their opening statements. So I think that's a point of discussion. Unfortunately, I have to leave, but I want to leave everybody with that thought process and let the other panelists give you their points of view and contribute to a very important discussion. And thank you again, Sharif, for having me on. And everyone, have a great weekend.
Yes, Mr. Marshall, thank you for joining today. Tomorrow we have our parliamentarian debate. So you are honorable parliament member, so I want to invite you for tomorrow's session.
No problem. Just make sure that I'm on the opposite. No, I'm only kidding.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Ching, what do you want to add for today's discussion?
Okay. Well, actually, I'm, here, this topic, I'm really one of the earliest pioneer. I remember it was in the early 1980s when Hubert Dreyfus wrote the book, What Computer Cannot Do, was on the panel of this cognitive new field of cognitive science. And also Steve Palmer was the chairman. So it was way back. Also I had I'm one of the person who have all the background of computer science. So I'm one of the people who actually come out and criticize the whole field of computer science. So it goes way back. And they just keep developing. The cognitive science part did not do much of anything. Okay, it just follow other developments and claim that it's part of it. And as late as 2016, I published a paper in IEEE, Knowledge-Oriented Society. You can check into it. And it described the goal of cognitive computing. And the goal is to solve the problem of permanence, or the problem of permanent survival. In other words, all this temporary survival that the machines human make are all temporary, while the living system is permanent. So we are not even touching the basic problem of the universe. What is the problem for us to really try to solve? Okay, so we're missing all this, thing, and the cognitive computing sort of brought up this problem. Actually, the conference itself is called cognitive science. IEEE cognitive science is where the paper was published. The process of cognitive computing is to copy the human cognitive system of the brain. Okay, so people ask what are the category? Okay, the category is what the brain can do. Okay, brain can help us see things, hear things, smell things, touch things, do everything. Okay, so I recommend in the comment section that you can look up software-cell.com. That's the place where I describe the complete automated system, and also it's used to create the human brain, to simulate the human brain. Okay, and what we need to start with is the complete automated software, self-generated complete software, and from there we want to do a self-generated neural network. Okay, the software is self-generating, so it can generate the software itself. The software cell itself is like a biological cell. It's really a computer program. Okay, it can generate itself, so it can generate infinite number of cells. Okay, so it will form a neural network. And in the process self-generating, you have an external file which dictate how the next generate software cell will be like. So far, I can do is just to change the name of all the cells. I can generate software cell until the disk is full. Okay, what we need is some kind of intelligence, which is beyond human intelligence. Okay. In terms of intelligence, the level of intelligence, there's science. Science deals with 5 variables. And anybody before that are really the pre-science, okay, maybe 3 variables. All the social scientists, life science, they can do anything they want, but they cannot get up to 5 variables. Okay, Nobel Prize in science get probably manipulate 10 variables, one old problem, one new problem. Then we come to pole science. Okay, pole science, the simplest problem in pole science is dealing with 25 variables in the problem of contact problem. Okay, 300 years, the scientists couldn't solve this problem. Even today, it start to recognize this problem of contact. So what I'm saying is we're trying to build a robot, the human body first. Okay, the robot connect to the brain. The robot has to be controlled by the brain. So basically, we have to build the whole thing, the whole human body. Okay, our level of intelligence is very few people get to science. Okay, audience, our speaker here probably all into the science. They can think and talk about science. Okay, beyond that, both science, the easy is 25 variable. The next difficult is 50 variable for social science. If you figure out all the items in an economy, you see there are roughly minimum about 50 variables. Okay, then when you get to life science, where there's 500 variables, if you look at the Intel chip, okay, the choices you have, the machine choices you have is about 500. Okay, another way you are dealing with these things getting more and more complex. Okay, now I just outlined the problem of self-generating software cell. Okay, designing of this external common file. Okay, you can look up in my patent. Okay, it's all there. Okay, you look at that, thinking about how to design this external common file. It is beyond current human intelligence. Okay, we have 10 members at the Pole Science Institute who are my mentors. Okay, they are thinking in pole science, but I do not see that maybe 1 or 2 can think of how to design this brain. Okay, generate each cell and ask the cell to do different things. Okay, that kind of thinking is somewhat beyond what I can think of. So I've outlined this whole process of cognitive science, of designing of a brain.
Okay.
And as an expert in this field from the start, also a pioneer in this field from the start. So I'm waiting for people, anybody who can contribute. It's all open problem. From now on, we're going to give everything out free to society. Let them think about this. Anybody who can handle anything, let us know. Okay, so I warn you that it will take lots of intelligence. Okay, no.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Professor Donald.
Well, I think one of the things that's important about all of this is we confuse ourselves by using words like intelligence and cognition and things like that and applying them to computers because they're not. It tricks us into thinking that what computers are doing is anything close to what human beings are doing, and there's really no relationship. Like Watson is just looking stuff up in a database. It's basically looking stuff up in a copy of basically Wikipedia. It's not thinking in any conceivable way. Alexa's not doing language recognition in any conceivable way. I find Alexa so incredibly frustrating. I can barely even use it. I have to try 5 different combinations to be able to get Alexa to find something that Alexa actually recognizes. And people talk about their degrees. I have an undergraduate degree in linguistics, and it's considered the most difficult major in my university, UC Santa Cruz, which at the time had the best linguistics department in the world. And we had 40 hours of homework a week in just one of my classes. And so we basically did nothing but study from the minute we got up until the minute we went to sleep for years. And so it takes a lot of work to start to be able to understand how complicated human language is. So a lot of people just simply assume that they understand it. And if you just assume you understand something, you can simplify it quite a bit in your brain and think, oh, I understand this, and assume it's a lot simpler than it actually is. So what we get is the ELIZA effect. And ELIZA was a computer program that was written, forever ago in the 60s that tricked people into thinking that it was a therapist. So what would happen is people would type in, they'd say, I feel terrible today. And it would go, well, tell me more about that. And, my father doesn't like me, or my mother doesn't like me. And it goes, oh, you just told me that your mother doesn't like you, and so on like that. And it would just pick out keywords. And people actually thought that it was listening to them. And they actually felt that it was understanding them and asking them questions based on understanding. And that's because we anthropomorphize the computers. And there's actually been research at Stanford, and I have a friend who repeated a lot of social science experiments that had been done with people, and he repeated them with computers, and he showed that people, basically, he got the same results with people and computers that they got with people and human beings. So basically, if a computer was, somebody was, kind of the archetype of the 70s New Yorker, where FU meant have a nice day, and it was very, rough and tough, the people liked the computer better than if it was nice. And if the computer was nice to somebody who was used to being nice, it liked the computer better. But if it was rough, it didn't like it as much. It had more trouble using it. It found the computer more difficult to use, and so on like that. So the point of the matter is that we project, just like we assume our cat understands more than it probably actually understands. Anyway, that's what people call the ELIZA effect. In any event, people talk a lot about how we're going to have self-generating computers, where computers are going to write programs that are going to get smarter and smarter and so on like that. And every time they do it, they say, but we don't really know quite how to do that yet. And but we're going to figure it out. And that we don't quite know how to do it yet is kind of pretty important. I mean, there's an old joke kind of, is this, all you have to do to make rhinoceros soup is get a rhinoceros and boil it. I mean, the part of getting the rhinoceros is very difficult. And so the part of figuring that out, no one has the faintest idea how to do that. And the question is it even possible to do? I mean, we talk about making a computer as smart as a human being, and once we do, then it's going to be so smart that it's going to start building computers that are smarter than us. Well, if we could build computers that were smarter than us, why don't we do it right now? I mean, we're as smart as human beings. We can't do it. It's nothing that we know how to do. And the basic thing about it is that, and Hugh mentioned this, is that we don't think with our minds, because there's no such thing as minds. Mind, where is a mind? You look in the brain. Try and find a mind in your brain. There's minds are explanations, not causes. There's nothing in your brain that's a mind that causes things. When you see somebody do something, you say to yourself, or you do something, you ask yourself the question, what caused me to do it? And you come up with an explanation. And mind is a good explanation, and it's a useful explanation. You can organize behavior by looking. In the history of psychology, we tried to look at behavior completely externally. So there was this idea of behaviorism where we said, well, we don't care what's going on inside because we can't look at it. We'll only look at what's going on outside, people's behavior. And then Noam Chomsky came along and he said, well, that's ridiculous because it won't explain language. And so then he came up with the idea of cognitive psychology, the whole idea of cognition, that we could understand what's going on inside of people's brains. But that's something that we are still struggling with. That became actually very mechanized, and it was this idea that there were symbols, just that we were like computers, that we're breaking the world into objects and symbols and dealing with those symbols, which would be wonderful because then we could use that for computers. But we're not. What we're doing is our entire bodies are involved in it, and our bodies are responding to other people's bodies because of mirror neurons and other things, our reaction to other people's pheromones and other things like that. So when we make decisions, we're involved in this complicated network of interactions with the world around us. And I'll just close with saying that one of the people who was very into this symbolic thing, a guy named Herbert Simon, came up with the idea of decision theory, and his colleague James March, who I was fortunate enough to know and spend many hours talking to, he wrote a book called A Primer on Decision Making. And he pointed out that when you make decisions, you can't know everything to make the perfect decision. You're buying a car. You can't know, was that car on the assembly line? Was the person who tightened the bolts in his best form that day? Every car isn't perfect. You don't have enough information and so you can get caught in a loop trying to find all the information. So what we do is we do what's called satisfying. We make a decision saying, well, that's good enough. This is good enough. So we're going to make the decision to do it. Well, what does good enough mean to a computer? I mean, what does that mean? What does a computer want? What is a computer's goals? What makes a computer happy? What's going to make a computer feel satisfied? It doesn't mean anything. When is that ever going to mean anything? Well, you can say, oh yeah, that's going to happen. We're going to make stuff that's going to make that happen. We haven't got the faintest idea. We don't even understand how it happens with people by a long shot. So we have cognitive computing is a thing in the sense that we're able to make computers have better and better ELIZA effect so that we can use them and have better and better user interfaces. But they're not it's nothing like what human beings do. It's just more and more clever user interfaces that seem more human-like to us, which make them easier to use for us. And that's what cognitive computing really is.
Thank you. Madam Dulcie, what you want to add for cognitive computing?
Hi, guys. Well, what I think is interesting, I'm not an expert in this field at all, not at all, but I do have a relationship with neural and cognitive computing through spatial computing and augmented reality and virtual reality. And um, I'm hearing what Professor Donald is saying, and I do understand that the computers aren't going to be as smart as humans. We don't understand our own brains that well, and the computer brain is kind of like way off in the future, an actual sentient computer brain. Um, but we are using cognitive computing as proxies for our own brains. And we are setting up these systems that will allow us to offload certain things that we don't want to worry about anymore or consider anymore, and give it to our proxy, our replicant brain of sorts. And that's definitely in the cognitive computing realm. um, I do have to say that I I am witnessing in real time the everything becoming a quantified event. Everything that everybody does is going to be tracked and traced and linked back to its source. And that's happening in real time right now. Like, companies and individuals are thinking of ways on how to take every single step in a process and log that as if you were doing Git development and getting Git commits. And every time that you change something in the system, you are putting your stamp on it, and it's now going to be like an onion unraveled, and you can get down to the source of that. The eventuality is that we will be able to see if the mechanic was having a bad day in the future. It's starting to happen. People are getting tracked and traced, and all of that is part of the greater proxy of these computer brains for corporations and individuals. Now, the scary part of that is because everything is being tracked and traced and quantified and placed on ledgers and being able to uh, be pulled up at a whim, pretty much. Um, that will be a scary factor for humans in general, especially humans that are weak-minded and are very influential or can be manipulated very easily. Um, that's already starting to happen. I was at a hackathon this past week at MIT, and Microsoft had their AI Azure platform available for the hackers, and there were two neural headset makers there, and the a lot of the hackers were thinking of ways to use computer vision for sentiment analysis and using voice recognition on the AI for sentiment analysis. So the idea is that people would walk into spaces and the computer would see you and look at your face and determine whether you're sad or happy, or whether your body temperature is a certain temperature, if you're feeling cold. It will look at your temporal aura and see what color you're emitting on your body, so that it could change the space to tailor for you or give you information and feedback that you need to help you move into the space. You know, if you're feeling scared, it eases you in, or if you're happy, it like highlights that happy feeling, so it really solidifies a personal experience for you. That's all manipulation, and that's utilizing technologies that require understanding of somebody's brain and their emotions and how they feel. Um, so to me, it's very cautionary. And I think that we definitely need to step back and set up some standards around what it means to use these new systems, and how they're going to affect humanity in a general. But yes, they're more of a proxy, and given bad actors, given in the hands of bad actors, it can be detrimental to society if not done properly. But that's my 2 cents on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Yes, well, as a philosopher and a science fiction writer, immediately I tackle the whole notion of robotics and human beings, and look at the difference between a human and a machine. Now, for me, it all comes down to this: when the machine ceases to operate, in terms of death, when a machine ceases to operate, that will be it. But a human being, which is a nexus of electromagnetic forces, First law of thermodynamics, you cannot destroy energy. We are immortal. We transcend time and space and we enter into a new dimension. So straight away for me, when a machine ceases to operate, that's it. But a human being will live on because of the first law of thermodynamics. We are a nexus of electromagnetic forces. You cannot destroy energy. Everything is subjected to entropy. Everything is subjected to entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, the immutable metaphysical law of the universe. Everything decays over time. Death, we see it within the universe with the star as it succumbs to gravitational collapse and so forth. But in terms of a human being and a machine, if we want to actually differentiate the two, it all comes down to this. A machine will cease to operate, but a human being will live on because we are a nexus of electromagnetic forces. We are immortal. Now, in terms of my science fiction work, I introduce a new kind of concept, a new level of thinking. In my book, Androids and the Gods, do androids dream of the gods? Now, if a machine can develop within itself, within the complexity of the system itself, an understanding, a spiritual understanding that there is something that transcends time and space. Incidentally, time and space is an electromagnetic force, electromagnetic field, 0-point electromagnetic quanta. If a machine could develop an understanding that God exists, that there is something that transcends time and space, then we need a new philosophy. We need a new philosophy to explain what it means to be human. So I'm taking artificial intelligence to, if you like, another sphere. Within the complexity of the system itself, I believe a machine will develop an understanding, a new form of robotic consciousness, if you like, to understand that there is something that transcends time and space. And if a machine can reach that level of understanding, then we need to create a new philosophy. We need to redefine epistemology, what it means to be human. And then we create a new philosophy. So I'm sort of taking artificial intelligence into theological spheres, metaphysical spheres, sort of very advanced levels of thinking. So we can create a machine that can mimic a human being in terms of thought process. Incidentally, what is thought process within a human being? I mean, we're thinking and talking, but what is the spark behind thought process? How does it happen? It's mysterious in itself. It actually enters into that metaphysical sphere, which can only be connected into theological terms. So within a machine, we can build a machine that can think and operate as a result of the mathematical algorithms that regulate the mathematical pathways of a robotic mind, and so forth. The neural networks, which are incidentally building new connections all the time, which is, again, metaphysical in itself. And the transistors that create a prototype form of consciousness. But if we can develop a machine that actually develops within itself a sense of spirituality, a sense of there has to be something beyond space and time. Space and time is an electromagnetic field, 0-point electromagnetic quanta. Then this creates a new philosophy. What are we? What does it mean to be human? And then we need a new philosophy to describe the nature of the mind, the nature of the soul, which is a nexus of electromagnetic forces, which cannot be destroyed because of the first law of thermodynamics. And we have to create a new philosophy, epistemology, the whole notion of knowledge. How does a machine know? We can talk about transistors, we can talk about algorithms and so forth, and neural networks and the complexity of artificial intelligence, advanced machines and so forth. But it gets to a point where it transcends that. And then we go into a new sphere of thought. And this can only be explained within theological terms. And as you know, I've discussed the whole notion of God's existence, destroying Richard Dawkins' arguments. Incidentally, Richard Dawkins is running away from me. I've challenged him recently at Oxford University and so forth. As you know, I'm still waiting for a debate. And we have to enter into that theological territory to explain the mechanisms of the mind. Incidentally, the human brain, what is it? It's a spatial temporal construct, the most complex thing within the universe. We can take a mathematical brainwave patterns and so forth and try to mimic them with the computer. But the truth of the matter is this. It transcends science. We have to go into theology to understand the mechanisms of the mind, the mechanisms of a machine. So if a machine, as I mentioned in my book, Androids and the Gods, the first law of robotics, the first law of robotics, an android will be built, an android will be programmed to acknowledge the one world government as its only God. In the story, I talk about how the machine is being controlled by the one world government, the club, and is controlled, and they build machines to actually focus on the government as God. But these machines break away from that. They break away from that programming circuit, and they develop their own understanding of what it means to be human, what it means to be alive, and so forth. And then we go into theological terms. So I'm bringing in a new philosophy, a new understanding of what it means to be human.
Thank you. Madam Ali Rice.
Hi. Oh, I don't know how to follow that. Okay. So, I don't have lots of experience of cognitive computing, but one of the things that I do know is a friend of mine has a sister that has a has a child that's got extreme autism, and the way that he communicates is through touchscreen technology. And essentially, if he didn't have that touchscreen technology, he wouldn't be able to communicate. And the thing is, he is a thinking, breathing, but without that kind of technology. So I think the applications to the cognitive computing is that it kind of enhances and enables us to do things more positively, and promotes opportunity and access where there isn't any, and kind of brings more efficiency. And even though it's really amazing to think these computers can think for themselves, I think that kind of emotional capacity and compassion that we have as humans, I don't see that. Although there's other people that are speakers regularly on here that do see robots having consciousness. I don't really understand why we're trying to create something when most people haven't developed their consciousness and awareness and natural kind of intuition. And I think that it's a gift that we've all got, and so many people haven't explored it. So I think it's I think there's a correlation between that cognitive computing and our own cognitive ability and potential that we haven't explored in ourselves. So I think there's kind of a divergent thinking that we need to do, really, to basically tap into our own potential, but also kind of enable that to happen in others as well. So I think technology is fascinating and fantastic, but I just think it needs to have a good reason to kind of produce it, really. So I think, as always, the ethical and the accountability to why they do what they do is really important. So yeah, and so I'm very quite spiritually aware and do things very consciously for the most part, and I just think as we develop artificial intelligence, that the reason they do what they do needs to still be kind of examined. So I think we need to just kind of make sure that we're moving in a positive direction. So that's my first thoughts.
Thank you. This is excellent discussion. There are a few questions from audience. I will go for concluding remarks, but in concluding remarks, you can respond this question. There are a few questions and response from audience. Onika Sham, she want to ask what are the big research problem in cognitive computing. Noor Fazrin, what are the major topic of cognitive science? Uh, Mahdi Hassan, he want to know, will AI overall surpass human intelligence in the near future? Alea, she want to know how will cognitive computing and data science transform the field of education? There are some good comments from, I think, our friend from Brazil. Good morning, everyone. This topic is extremely relevant. Artificial intelligence is the way of several efficient solutions from Brazil. So, my friend, you can join in our forum as speakers. Regularly, you support and inspire our forum. Professor Rob.
Sure. A lot to parse there. The use of cognitive computing is predominantly focused on replicating how a human would approach problems, with the idea of being able to get human-based problem solving at computing speed. The first major implementation of a cognitive computing model was IBM's Watson at scale. since 2018, we've had AIs writing code. That's not new news. That goes back to 2018. And with regard to building robots to build cognitive computers, never been a requirement. The metaverse now is where AI-driven mobile robots are being trained. So you don't actually have to physically build robots or physical structures anymore. You can build virtual structures, have them operate in the metaverse, in the localized version of the metaverse using a tool like NVIDIA's Omniverse. And that's actually how the autonomous cars are being programmed today. And right now, that's the only platform they're being programmed on. The car companies have come together, oddly, in one major group around that platform because they recognize that you've got to be able to do training at computer speeds. And in the Omniverse or in the metaverse, you can do centuries of training in days. So the ability to do the development speeds up significantly when you can do it at machine speeds. And of course, we've got machine learning and deep learning. Machine learning requires an awful lot of data science involved in the process. Deep learning requires massive data sets. Neither one has resulted in a truly what we were hoping to achieve in a truly cognitive computer. But we are far beyond what Donald pointed out in terms of what Alexa and Siri can do, which are basically speech to text front ends on search engines. What you typically do on a Siri or Alexa is when you ask a question, it converts your question to text, puts it in the front end of Google search, and then converts what it finds back into words and tells you. Amazon does and has had, I think for 7 years, a prototype cognitive computer up, more of a conversational computer implementation up, which is interesting. It'll hold. I've had it hold a conversation with me for up to 15 minutes. And it's kind of fascinating, but it's not intelligent. It fools you, much like computers a decade or so ago fooled the Turing test into thinking that it's a person. But you have to ask yourself, and this has to do with conversational computing, which are also in market. Does it really matter if it thinks like a human? If you think it's a human, the first large-scale tests of Watson in sales, which was done in the insurance industry, by the end of the test, I worry for my sex, male respondents were trying to ask the computer out, thinking it was human. I should point out, I don't think we had a single example of a female respondent trying to do that, suggesting which side of the sexual coin is the smartest. So then it's not us. So the application of cognitive computing has advanced quite a bit. What I would recommend people doing, if they haven't come up to speed with current generation technology, is to really watch last week's keynote for NVIDIA's GTC. I posted one link that talks about the AI actually explaining what it is, which is kind of fascinating. But the keynote really walks you through what the state of the art is for AI right now, and how advanced the AIs will be in your car starting about 2025, where you will get a next generation digital assistant in the car that will not only handle the driving and entertainment, but actually hold a conversation with you if you want it to, and much more advanced than probably anybody currently on this panel is currently interacting with, because it's to a large extent it's still operating in the labs. But it showcases what we're going to have in just a few years, and highlights the fact that probably about 2030 to 2040, we should have a significant breakthrough in conversational computers, where most cases those calls that are coming in and annoying us all the time won't be the typical robots or even people. They'll be conversational computers, and we won't be able to tell the difference. And the scary thing about it, at least from a standpoint of being on the other side, is they will be able to much more effectively target our vulnerabilities and get us to say yes, where a human and an existing script-based system cannot. We had questions with regard to education and cognitive computing. And personally, I think once we reach a certain state of having these things broadly available, education will fold over and be handled by cognitive computers. It will be handled by AIs. Whether they're cognitive computers or emulations is still unclear. But with that, you could actually structure a course specifically for the individual student. That they would interact with the AI, not interact with the teacher. And I know, well, this isn't consistent across the world. The Norwegian countries in particular do fund education far better than a lot of other countries do. But we have a serious problem with regard to adequately funding education. And this may be a way to get around that and provide the customized education that each student needs, and at a price that governments are willing to spend. The decoupling of the requirements for quality education with the funding for it is problematic pretty much worldwide, and with a couple exceptions. And the cognitive computing AIs, advanced AIs that can emulate teachers, could solve that. NVIDIA has been demonstrating for the last 15 years that AIs can write music, they can do art, good art. They can come up with original works, though in a lot of cases they're derivatives. So what they do with the original work is they look at the work that is successful, that receives high accolades. They look for common trends across that work and then create something that's original, that's based on that derivative work. But if you think of an artist, most artists that have learned conventionally, their work is also to a certain extent derivative because they've learned from the masters that have preceded them. So they may have added some special sauce, but it may be impossible for an observer to tell the difference. And if you can't tell the difference, there's an argument there may not be a reasonable difference to tell. So all of that stuff is going to have to be resolved. There's a lot of discussion, of course, about computers, faith, religion. I won't go into that fairly deeply. There is a prior work of study that certainly has argued that religion, to a certain extent, works like a virus on humans. Whether that's relevant or necessary is something we have to discuss, at least have to resolve. And as we mentioned earlier, trying to emulate the human mind when we have yet to figure out what the human mind truly is problematic. However, we are close to the point of being able to basically duplicate a person and fool you in that duplication, largely by using the existing work that they've published. NVIDIA again demonstrated at GTC, and it's worth saying, that they created a digital twin, a low resolution digital twin of their CEO that you can have a conversation with, and based on the knowledge that's been put in about what that CEO has written, it will respond as if the CEO responded, but it cannot yet respond in areas where the information has not been provided. So it's a search engine, again, a search engine front end with some advanced logic that allows it to present itself like the CEO would present itself. It's stilted still, but like the CEO would present itself, but answer questions as the CEO had previously answered them. So it could be a way for a child who has lost their parents to have a conversation with those parents and get answers the way those parents would have answered them in the past, not in the present, but in the past. And then as we get into the next decade, we'll have the capability of updating those with current information and allow them to answer questions as if they existed in the present. Still not necessarily a full representation, but could fool somebody into thinking it was. And then again, the difference may not be pertinent. Some of the other questions. Let's see. What are one of the big research problems with cognitive computing? Mentioned it before. With cognitive computing, you're trying to emulate something you don't understand. Until you understand something, it's very hard to emulate. You can make it behave and look like something else, but it won't be identical to that something else unless you understand the nuances of what that something is. And we're not there yet with the mind. And I think that's a problem. And one of the big issues and problems is we don't have a lot of computer scientists that are also psychologists or psychiatrists or mental experts. And that crossover is undoubtedly going to be critical to trying to connect the two. And be aware, for a lot of systems, like systems that are guided, rocket guidance systems, automotive guidance systems, you don't need cognitive computing. You need rapid decision making, and we can do that now. We now have in the labs working level 5 autonomous systems. We won't have those on the road till 2030. we get to level 4 autonomous systems in 2026, 2025, but really mature at 2026. So that, but those are not cognitive computers. Those are fast decision makers that should outperform people in the roles that they're putting in. In fact, that's the real question here that eventually we're going to have to resolve, is once computers can do a lot of jobs better than people, and right now we're moving from focused AIs, which is what we've had up to now, AIs that are developed for a specific purpose. We've now just started to move into broad AI. The NVIDIA announcement of transformer AIs, that's basically a broad AI implementation, just announced, not yet in market. And the goal, of course, is to go to general AI. These are AIs that can be put into any situation and do pretty much anything, kind of like a person. We're not there yet. We're at least a decade out. So that, but broad AI is where you can take a particular platform and use it for a variety of purposes. Like, for instance, you can use the same Jetson box for an autonomous car that you can use in a factory robot. That's broad AI. That's where you take an AI, a particular piece of hardware, and you can move it in multiple places and you get economies of scale. By the way, that's not the same thing as an AI that can do everything at the same time. Nobody's really working at that yet. That would be kind of like Terminator, the Terminator concept in Skynet, and I'm not sure we want that. But right now the goal is to create economies of scale and AIs that can function in a variety of areas, an almost unlimited variety of areas, which would be general AI. And as I said, we're just getting into broad AI, which was announced last week. Finally, let's see, one other question I'll answer before I give up. Artificial intelligence is a real reality, and cognitive computing works with reading data, not structured. This is more relevant. Interesting comment. Probably should ask Virginia to actually be on one of these panels at some point. And let's see, I wanted another question though. Will AI overall surpass human intelligence in the near future? Well, it depends how you define near future. Gates, Musk, and others have red flagged this, that we're not really prepared for a cognitive computer that could pass human intelligence in the near future. And let's be aware, there's a lot of discussion whether human intelligence should be the bar. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's a false construct. My view is that something's either smart or it's not. We just broadly understood that octopi are I think octopi is the right word. Octopi are intelligent. They're intelligent creatures. We've known dolphins were intelligent for a long period of time, but they're not human intelligent. And it's very possible we actually have we've created intelligent AIs. We just don't yet acknowledge their intelligence because our frame of reference is human, and it's certainly extremely possible that they could be more intelligent than us and approach problems differently, and we would not recognize that for a period of time because of that difference in approach. But once we get to a point where computers are smarter and more capable, we are going to have issues, and the goal that companies like IBM have taken, where they're focused predominantly on using AIs to enhance humans as opposed to replace them, is probably something we should be adopting more institutionally and globally. Because otherwise, the risk is we're going to do something really stupid. And the massive efforts to drop AIs into defense systems, I believe the DoD just popped up this month, talking about the fact that in a lot of defense systems they're pushing hard for an AI without a human element in it, and that can be problematic. In fact, we're watching the war in Ukraine, and a number of the drones that have now been deployed, called suicide drones, AI-driven, are release and forget. You don't even aim them; but they circle until they find a target, and they autonomously go after the target. That's very troubling. And of course, New Zealand and other countries are now trying to get laws passed that would restrict those kinds of weapons. But that historically that hasn't worked. If you're a country that's concerned about your neighbor, you're probably not going to adhere to those laws any more than Russia's adhering to laws today in the war with Ukraine. So the proper answer long term is probably to work more aggressively on the defensive AI projects, like Lifeboat Foundation's AI Shield, and Google has a similar project that's in the work. But Google's like a 4-year-old on sugar. They don't focus on anything long enough. So the goal, part of our goals as a society, should be now working in parallel with developing these weapon systems, with defenses against one of these weapon systems going rogue and creating huge problems, which undoubtedly will be in our future if we don't more aggressively focus on it. I would say that's probably the biggest problem we've got with AIs right now, is the growing probability that an AI that has a lot of authority, particularly in a defensive weapons platform, goes off the rails, and we are not able to respond to the threat effectively. And that's it for me, because I've got to run to another meeting in 8 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks and what you want to respond for different questions?
Loved what Rob said. I particularly like the part about the cognitive computing avatar during the CEO speech, because I think a Google-driven search CEO speech is better than a lot of them I've heard recently. So the concept that we're beginning to look at things like that, I find fascinating. The cognitive computing is such a broad term, just like artificial intelligence is such a broad term. You know, there's many elements in it. There's many nuances of it. One of the questions Virginia asked was in educational quantitative computing. Again, as you begin to get specialized into, you see different things. You see, like part of Watson's use in multiple vertical industry segments, where it did well in some, it didn't do very well in some others. And you're going to see that across all of it. So in educational quantitative computing, I see a lot of promise, because what we're seeing is we're seeing education moving away from using the same educational approach that was used in the time of Socrates in much of our education, and moving into a manner where we're doing more personalized education using avatars, using conversational artificial intelligence, using really early stages of cognitive computing. One of the key points that Rob mentioned, I would like to reflect upon again, is where cognitive computing is beginning to have some power is when it has retrospective data, and what the computing is built on is around that retrospective data. Where cognitive computing is struggling a little bit is where it has to go and look the other way, where it has to look out the windshield of the car and go into the unknown. And that unknown is where you're seeing the difficulties in it, just like the example that was used with self-determinate attack drones. They have problems. You use it, the collateral damage of those is going to be high, but the collateral damage of war is pretty high anyways. So you have to do the look at those. I would like to just do one other quick thing as we talk about cognitive computing, and it's to bring some reality to where we are and where we think it's going. Oftentimes, Sharif, you know, I talk about market size. And the cognitive computing market size in 2018 was just under $9 billion. What the forecast is by 2026, the cognitive computing market will be over $90 billion. So fairly rapid growth as you look at cognitive computing. And I agree with Donald and what Hugh said and others, is that it's still pretty elementary at this point. Just like it's moving from narrow AI on up. Same thing with cognitive computing. And what the other thing I enjoyed is Donald mentioned Herb Simon earlier, and I was a fellow in one societies with Herb, and he made a comment there that I just loved. He said, you know, as he looks at the future of computers, if we can dream it, it probably will happen. And that is kind of the promise of cognitive computing, is if we as a human species think that we can impart our knowledge and our process to a computer, that is where it's going. Because, sorry, cognitive computing is as much about the process of finding answers as it is about the data it takes to find the answers. And that's the very important differential when you look at cognitive computing versus basic AI. AI is about the data. Cognitive computing's about the process that is used to derive the outcome. And so, we have 6 others left to talk. So I will think I'll probably end there. And
Thank you.
but I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Ching, with your permission, I want to give chance Professor Edward. He just joined, and I will give you a chance for concluding remarks.
Yeah.
Professor Edward.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in the middle of something very busy, so I could only get on for a few minutes here. But yeah, and I'm sure that I concur with Rob and David, because I always seem to concur with Rob and David and their remarks. But I just wanted to add, because one of the things I'm literally working on at this very moment is ways to reform our drug approval process. And one of the key elements here is the use of cognitive computing to try to understand, the relationship between the human body, the human genome, human health, all of the factors that go into aging, and what that allows us to do in terms of coming up with ways to slow aging, stop aging, deal with the various ailments associated with aging, Alzheimer's, and things of that nature. And in fact, I'm literally working on some legislation right now, which is why I have to get off in a few minutes. But I think somebody, maybe it was Rob, mentioned about the Watson supercomputer, which of course had been used to scan many MRIs and come up not only with with evaluations and diagnostics, but with actual discoveries. I have a friend who's working in Boston doing something very similar with AIs. And so I just wanted to kind of throw in there that one of the areas I see in cognitive computing really providing benefits to human beings in the future is in this area of future medicine. I know there are other issues you're going to be discussing and have discussing, but I just wanted to say that for those of you listening in the Asian Pacific area, this is a very important area that you should look at if you're interested in careers, if you're interested in where technology is bringing us. Take a look at the application of cognitive computing to healthcare issues, because there really is incredible promise there. I have to jump off as well, but thanks for a very important topic, as always, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor Ching.
Okay, well, let's conclude this with what is the goal of existence? What is the meaning of life? Okay, these are the things. I introduced a new concept which I had a long time ago. It's called self-creation. You see, you can find it from selfcreation.org. Okay, when we can self-create deal with the self-creation of the entire living system. You cannot create a human to survive. Okay, you got to create the earth, create the solar system so the human can survive. So this is the ultimate goal of existence. And when we self-create, we have to have some specification, and the specification will tell us what is the meaning of life. Okay, what kind of meaning you want to give to these people who self-create? Okay, by the way, this I'm having a hypothetical argument with David Hume about creation versus evolution. Okay, my argument is looking into the future. If you look into the future, when we can create ourselves, create this living system, what would this thing we created consider us? Okay, they will consider us as the creator. Okay, so all this talk about evolution, I don't see it. Anthony is prepared to argue with Richard Dawkins. Maybe you should use my argument. Look at my website.
Very much so. Very much so.
.org.
I will send you my arguments. I will send you my arguments.
My argument. Again, this guy Dawkins has nothing. I don't think he means anything. And he tried to.
I've been attacking the atheist community for a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay, yeah, okay.
we connect.
I
We
think,
connect.
use my argument. I don't think he can
We
be
connect. We
smarter
connect.
than David Hume. Okay. So basically, and I talk a little bit about how to achieve self creation. Okay, I think the current society, the current world should focus on building robots, not all these driverless cars. The driverless car runs, technically runs parallel to developing a robot. You develop a robot, the obstacle is that the robot cannot touch. The robot cannot come safely into contact with the environment. Once the robot hits something, it bounces back. Okay, nobody can solve this problem of contact for 300 years. Okay, so you need then many technical problems human intelligence today cannot overcome. Okay, we are promoting this solution of touch, starting maybe last decade. Actually, we've been working on this for the last 50 years. Okay. So once we can build a robot, and the robot should be controlled by complete automated software. Okay, so you have a complete automated control a robot and build a robot. Then if we continue to do this, we eventually will find the robot will develop into the human. Okay, and the complete auto software will become DNA. Okay, so this process of doing this, I already said in my beginning talk, I say it's very difficult. Okay, so what we really try to achieve is permanence through complete automation. We want things to live permanently. It's anything that's temporary is worthless. Sooner or later it becomes worthless. Okay, so you got to do this is the requirement of permanence is the requirement from the universe. Okay, universe intelligence. It's not human intelligence. Human-centered intelligence. They build things that dies. Okay, today everything just have finite life. That is not what
Entropy.
Yeah. Also entropy. I'm a plasma physicist. My doctorate degree in plasma physics. So I'm the Boltzmann person. Boltzmann
Like
is
a
the
law
guy
of
who
thermodynamics.
invented entropy. Yeah, entropy. Okay, he's statistic mechanic, not thermodynamic. He invents static mechanic to replace thermodynamics. So he really tried to do is to have a lawless physics without laws. Okay, all you need is a Boltzmann equation, conservation equation, and the collision. You can derive all the distributions. You see, then extend into quantum statistic mechanics, which I have made the most simplest counting of quantum statistic mechanics. So basically, this Boltzmann you mentioned, Anthony, you are extremely creative, okay, and also Alicia Rice, also extremely creative. It's this whole spectrum of creative, from most analytical to most creative.
You've got to read my new.
Yeah, I would really,
It's a new philosophy. It's a new.
New philosophy. I would get into
today
we have
I'm
a religion
philosopher,
or morality. I would say the religion is more important because religion has
I'm a theistic evolutionist. Theistic evolution.
Yeah. Evolution play a part in the creation, but it's not the total
I use the laws of physics, cosmology, science, philosophy to go into theological spheres.
Yeah,
and I'm one of the best at that.
You read some of my technical work, then you can be more.
We connect. We'll connect.
Yeah, we connect. Okay, yeah. Okay, great. Okay, I guess that's it.
On Facebook.
I leave it to Donald to make more sense of things. Anthony and Alicia Rice to provide more creativity to this discussion.
Professor Donald.
Professor Donald. Great. Yeah. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I point out that when people were talking about some of the things that cognitive computing did, what they were talking about was taking large amounts of data and finding regularities in the data, which is what deep learning does. Deep learning, basically, it's almost like going into a forest and finding the paths that people walk on the most. The paths that people walk on the most are wider and easier to walk on because the most people walk on them. They're well trod. And so what happens is that you feed a billion faces to the computer, and it starts learning that this particular pixel is most likely to be a face. And you get start getting the probability that a certain pixel is going to be part of the face. And the same thing works with speech or what a CEO says. So it starts saying, okay, this particular string of sound is most likely to be the string of sound that a CEO says. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything resembling intelligence. It's just statistical regularities. It's nothing different than the statistics we've been doing since the early 1900s. It's not anything new. The only reason that we can do it is because of GPU chips. Because when you create a neural net, it's just something that you do with arrays, and GPU chips allow you to manipulate arrays extremely quickly. And I learned how to make neural nets from arrays from Dave Huffman in 1979. That was in cybernetics. I took cybernetics at UC Santa Cruz in 1979 from Dave Huffman, and one of the things we did was learn how to create neural nets and recognize patterns in 1979. But there wasn't enough computing power to do what we do now and recognize large arrays like a face. And now we can. So it's not intelligent in any way. We're making the idea of general artificial intelligence. In a way, it doesn't make sense, because let's just say you create an artificial intelligence that's good enough to drive a car, and I am skeptical that we'll be able to do it as soon as people say we'll be able to do it. People have been making predictions in artificial intelligence, and the joke says it's 5 years in the future. It always has been. It's always been 5 years in the future. It always has been and always will be 5 years in the future. It's not changed. We may be able to figure out how to do it, and I'm sure eventually we'll be able to do it, but it's gonna take a long time, and we're not anywhere close. There's a recording of a video of Tesla trying to drive in automatic mode. It was made just a few months ago, and it did things like it saw a light rail track and started driving down the light rail track. It thought it was a road, and it made all kinds of errors. It's not even close to being able to drive autonomously. Back to what I'm saying is that it's not. If you have general artificial intelligence, why would you want to teach a car that's driving autonomous to say play pool? I mean, general artificial intelligence just knows how to do everything. So what you do is you teach the car how to play pool. You teach the car how to make biscuits. You teach the car how to. I mean, why? What's the point of it? The guy who invented deep learning thought the idea was ridiculous, Hinton. So people keep saying, well, they're going to be able to teach themselves. They're going to, and what that is that people take this idea of deep learning, and they pretend that the computers are actually learning. And if the definition of learning is that it changes what it does from its environment. And so because the fact that the software changes because of looking at the different faces, technically it's learning, but it's nothing like the kind of learning that we do as human beings. It's not, but we're doing the Eliza effect, where we're thinking to ourselves that we're learning, that we just project that it's learning in kind of a way that human beings are learning, just because we use the word learning. I'd like to see the program that Rob's talking about, because as a linguist, I immediately type something like the man that hunted elephants. The man that hunted elephants was eating fish on the tape. Eating fish. He was eating fish that he got from the eating fish that he got from the river, something like that. The man that was, as soon as you start getting embedded relative clauses, it blows them right out of the water. They can't deal with that. And I'm sure that what Rob was doing, or what winds up happening, is when you're in a situation like that, you unconsciously start simplifying the sentences in a kind of a way that makes it easier for the computer to understand. Like with Alexa cheats. Every sentence has to start with a verb when you're talking to Alexa, because you have to say Alexa and then a verb. And so that makes it be that the sentences are much easier for Alexa to be able to understand. So they cheat. They make it much easier to be able to understand. On the plus side of what they call cognitive computing, as I said, the having this huge amount of data, finding these regularities, is very useful. We've been able, we use it to find patterns, to be able to, finding these patterns allow us to be able to do things. And it's dangerous too, because what people pointed out is that it finds regularities in our behavior. We're not knowing anything about a person's emotions. What we're doing is we're finding out that we're understanding that a person behaves in a certain way. So sentiment analysis is our view of the behavior of certain results. So what we say to ourselves is, well, when a person does this, we call that anger, or when a person does that, we call it love. We're able to look at what somebody does, or the average person does. Somebody else, there's outliers. That's why it doesn't work all the time. But the general person does something that allows us to give some sort of a response so that we can sell them something. We do that with, in our own interactions. We notice that people behave in a certain way, and then that allows us to adjust our behavior so that we, if somebody's angry, we have a tendency to interact with them in a certain way. If somebody's in a good mood, we interact with them in a certain way. And that everything that we do is basically intended to persuade others in some way. And so we can use it for that, and it is dangerous because people are using it to persuade us to do things that are sometimes not useful for society. And can be valuable for similar reasons, but it doesn't have anything to do with real cognition in the same sense that humans do. It's got that name, but it's so far from the idea that. And when it writes computer programs, it's writing very, very simple database programs. It's not writing anything sophisticated. You just use the terms and then you project. It's the Elijah effect. Just you use the terms and then you imagine it's doing far, far more than it's actually doing. So,
thank you, sir.
Oh wait, I want to say one more thing. There's a wonderful book called The Myth of Artificial Intelligence, which I highly recommend, where he goes through this in great detail.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Well, my conclusion is this. In terms of what I've mentioned, my book, Androids and the Gods, I recommend very much. Androids and the Gods. Do androids dream of the gods? I mean, if we look at consciousness, what is consciousness? Consciousness is the continual creation of models, feedback loops which describe a model of our place in space and time. Space and time is basically an electromagnetic field, 0-point electromagnetic quanta. Now, as I mentioned before, if we look at a human being and an android and a robot, we can build a machine that can think, can do incredible things, even beyond human capacity. But what differentiates a human being from a machine? Well, my interpretation as a philosopher is this. Once a machine ceases to operate, that's it. There is nothing beyond that point. But with a human being, because we are a trinity in a sense, body, soul, and spirit. Our soul is a nexus of electromagnetic forces. It's our mind, will, and emotions, interconnected with our spirit, which is eternal, first law of thermodynamics. We are immortal. So once a machine ceases to operate, even though we can create a machine that can mimic the mechanisms in terms of the mind and so forth, once a machine ceases to operate, that's it. But a human being is subjected to entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. There is biological entropy, we decay and die, but our soul is immortal. Death is an illusion. And that is what differentiates a human from a machine. The brain and the mind are two separate entities. The mind operates through the brain. At death, it disconnects and becomes a free agent. We are immortal, and there is another dimension beyond this three-dimensional space. This electromagnetic field, 0-point electromagnetic quanta. So that is what ultimately differentiates a human from a machine. And obviously my theological arguments against Richard Dawkins, you can see on YouTube, as you know, and so forth, are extensive and very convoluted and so forth. And I go into evolution and the whole thing, but that's another subject matter for another time. But that is what ultimately differentiates a human from a machine. But in terms of our discussion today, we talk about cognitive computing, basically scanning human brains, seeing the brain wave pattern and trying to mimic that within a machine and so forth, and creating, if you like, a new life force, within the neural networks. They become more convoluted, there's new connections and so forth. But beyond all of that, we can go so deep and we can talk about the technicalities of AI and the mathematics and so forth. But you get to a point where it becomes so complex that you need to go into theological terms. Consciousness, whether robotic or human, is connected to a source, the great mind. This is a non-religious term. I'm not religious, but I'm talking about this from a theistic evolutionist. There has to be something that transcends time and space, that exists independent of both time and space, that sparks consciousness within a machine, within a human, and all of life. And in connection with what Dr. Ching said before, what is life? What is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is relationship. The meaning of life is relationship. Interconnecting with one another. You become who you are as a result of connecting with others. If you were on this planet alone, you wouldn't know who you were. Everything is about relationship, interconnecting with one another. And then beyond that, there has to be something beyond time and space that exists infinitely beyond time and space, outside the sphere of time and space, that connects everything together. robotic consciousness, human consciousness, and all of life stems from the source, who is eternal in nature. That is my ending. And what I recommend is, and I'm very happy to send Dr. Ching my book, Androids and the Gods. Do androids dream of the gods? If a machine can develop a sense of God, we need a new philosophy. What is it to be human? What does it mean to be human? And then what the nature of the mind, epistemology, which is to do with knowledge. Where does knowledge come from? Whether AI or human, everything is connected to the source. It's very, very deep. And I will close with that.
Yeah, I would say all intelligence are contained in DNA. Okay.
Teleonomy. But even that needs explaining.
Yeah, but nobody understands what is DNA.
Even if you go into genetics, DNA and so forth, that still needs explaining. That nucleus that goes beyond time and space, everything within epistemology, knowledge, with a teleonomy and so forth, it has to be connected to something greater. Otherwise, how do you explain knowledge? Within AI or human? But we'll connect later.
Thank you, Madam Ali Rice. Thank you, Mr. Mark, joining for today's session.
Okay. So I was picking my son up yesterday because he's doing a film advanced studies course, and I was talking to one of his friends that's doing. He's a very smart lad, and he was talking about the difference between physics and chemistry, and I was asking him. I naturally assumed actually that chemistry was easier to prove things because you could demonstrate what happened. And apparently he said that physics was easier to demonstrate because of the equations. And I'm not a scientist, but I turned around because I do a lot of yoga. I'm a creative. I've always been a natural creator, which we all are. And I say maybe we're energetic beings having a human experience. And I think the thing is that the most kind of definable way that we kind of appreciate energy is probably through power. And we don't see electricity, but obviously functions. And energetically, I know that there's natural chemistry with some people and not others. There's kind of always. So I think the thing is that with the cognitive computing, I think that what's interesting is developing frameworks so you enable a process to happen so that people have an individual learning that happens within a framework. And what I do is I actually run creative processes. So there's an individual experience and a shared experience, but there isn't a prescribed outcome. It depends on how they interpret a brief and their own ideas and that kind of self-expression. And obviously everyone's had different experiences, different opportunities. And I think what's interesting about creativity is that there's kind of infinite ways of exploring and answering a brief. So essentially you've got the same goals and objectives, but you've got your own way to determine which way you go. And I think the thing is that learning needs to be much more about kind of applying your knowledge so that you can utilize it so it has meaning and it has purpose. And that's what education should be about. So essentially, if you do a degree and all they want you to do is regurgitate other people's ideas because you've read other, experts in the field, but you're not thinking for yourself, you're not truly learning. And I think the thing is that the creative process is something that's really needs to be fostered because I think creativity is key to developing kind of a co-creative future. And most young people want to have ownership and want to have autonomy as well. So they want to make decisions and be given responsibility. And I think NASA did a research project, and if young children have genius, and a lot of education systems not that genius out there. So essentially, and everyone's not the same, but we've got our own gifts and talents, and we foster them because for whatever reason, they're embedded in us because there's a reason for them to be there. And I deeply believe that we're part of a bigger plan and that there is a purpose, otherwise we wouldn't be here, and neither would anything around us. And I do believe in probably afterlives, and I lost my dad almost 5 years ago, and he's never been more present to me than since I lost him. And I do appreciate the fact that there's other dimensions. And I've been involved in intuitive training for the last couple of years as well. And I didn't realize how intuitive an artist I was until I was involved with the mentor that I was. So I think the thing is that kind of tapping into the intangibles is really important to move forward, because we need to embrace the uncertainty, because we co-create what happens to us all. We're part of we're part of our whole attitude and our mindset is responsible for what happens to us and the people around us. So the thing is that, we should embrace the uncertainty. My favorite quote is from Deepak Chopra, and he always says that the most fertile ground for creativity is uncertainty. And I think that the only way that innovation happens and inspiration and imagination happens is because we go into that field of the unknown and we make something from nothing, And what's really interesting is, when we were younger, that we used to say, oh, don't just make it up. And I do think that there's a universal intelligence that we're all tapped into. But we get dissuaded from tapping into that. Or, when in your gut that there's something that's right or that's something not wrong, but we sometimes tend not to listen to that kind of intuition within us. So I think, I think that's the interesting part when we start opening and learning up. So there isn't tick boxing and right and wrong. There's an exploration and discovery. And that's what we should all be encouraging our young people to do, and and kind of following what they love and what makes them tick. So I think people are much happier if they love what they do. So I think robotics should be releasing people to do things that play to their strengths. So that's, and if cognitive computing can help define that genius and level of capacity, so that everyone's got some kind of fulfillment in their work, that transcends normality, as it were, or kind of a normal, safe kind of job that, so that with, robotics releases from that kind of, that mundane, then there must be, and I do think the way that the world's connected, there's a really amazing possibility that we can look at best practice and share knowledge, and if we openly share it instead of keeping it for ourselves. So I think, that kind of humanitarian aspect and ability to open things up so that, there's transparency, and there could be an age of enlightenment that we're going into instead of, so I just think it's really interesting. So I've never had a more profound experience than I have in the last 2 years. And Sharif, you're, this opportunities, but that kind of innovation and ability to see what's possible is what's exciting. So, and that's probably why we're all here, to resolve the problems and keep moving forward. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Ali Rice. Mark Lee, we are discussing on cognitive computing. So what you want to add and what's your contribution?
Well, I was hearing a couple of things that were really interesting to me and that I was fascinating. I was hearing what Ali was saying, and I definitely agree with her about the nature of creativity and the nature of that even into cognitive thinking and all of that. And unfortunately, as one that is involved in both the cultural world and in teaching, I sometimes feel that we're not encouraging enough of our young people to get into education and into the creative side. And sometimes we subjectively and don't do a good job of allowing that to happen. We need to do a better job of that, particularly here in the West. That's just my personal opinion, because we've not been doing a good job of that. And we sometimes actually disencourage people from being engaged in that creative aspect, even when they're in grade schools. I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have 2 nephews. And I know that they were taught creativity and actually getting involved and learning about everything from Mother Nature to definitely trying to explore their life and everything at a very young age. And Ali, I can also relate to what you're saying about having that connection to the those that have gone on and all of that. I'm fortunate enough to have both of my parents still living, and I'm in my late 50s and everything, but I do have grandparents that I lost many decades ago that I still feel are part of the influence that go and guide my life. I know my grandmother, who was a librarian, passed in like 82, and we're in 2022, so 40 years ago, and I still feel her presence even to this day in the kind of the creative stuff that I do, and her guiding it along with some of the other people that have moved into ancestral grounds, including some of that used to work where I am at now, because I'm at the Hayti Heritage Center. As a matter of fact, there's a group of folk singers here that are performing. So y'all may hear some background noise in the background because it is a cultural arts center here in Durham, North Carolina. And I'm one of the site coordinators. As a matter of fact, my program director is here as well. And he's roaming around also. But definitely we are seeing that kind of creativity going in that sense. So I was really relating to a lot of what Ali was saying. I do sometimes worry, and this may come back to the cognitive component, and I'd love to hear what folks have to say about this, including Mr. Anthony, where we are now seeing more and more people getting into what is called the metaverse. And I've even heard some of the people talking about that, where, you know, I literally could be here at work doing the different things that I'm doing, but one appearing on this podcast and making sure that the people here are doing what they're doing and engaging with them. But I could be having a meeting at the same time somewhere else because another being could be my agent representing me and all of that. And then at what point does that being start having its own cognitive abilities and maybe even want to go off the track that I wanted to take it? And I know a lot of that has to do with programming and all, but that is some of the things that I'm hearing, that while I'm loving the metaverse, and I've even done some metaverse events, as it further advances, I do worry about its impact on humanity and all along those lines, because you might have some folks that might be serving as your agents that aren't quite exactly acting the way that you would. They might even decide to go in a whole different track and all along those lines. But that's just some of the things that I've heard about that I sometimes wonder about. And I'd love to hear from Donald and you and others, their thoughts on these particular matters. But that's just some of my initial thoughts as I've been sitting back and listening, and also reflecting on some of the things that I've been involved in, including a Black Business Olympics /Expos that actually addressed the metaverse and had a metaverse sponsor. So just some of my quick thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is excellent discussion, especially cognitive computing. Many speakers joined from around the world. And tomorrow we have our special debate. So I want to invite you all to our debate. Thank you, Professor Ching, Professor Donald, Mr. Anthony, Madam Ali Rice, and Mr. Markley for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.